The smell of burning tallow filled the narrow room above the general store as Esther Vaughn bent over another torn shirt, her needle moving through the worn fabric with practiced precision, despite the flickering candlelight that made her eyes water. 22 years old, and already her hands looked like they belonged to someone twice her age, calloused and rough from endless mending, washing, and whatever work she could find to keep herself fed in this dusty corner of Boise, Idaho, in the summer of 1882. She had been here for 3 months now, ever since the stagecoach she had been traveling on broke down just outside town, and she found herself stranded with barely enough money for a week's lodging. The seamstress who had promised her work back in Sacramento had died before Esther arrived, leaving her with nothing but a carpetbag full of clothes and a growing sense of desperation. The room she rented was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a chair, but it was hers as long as she could scrape together the $2 a week Mrs. Henderson demanded. Tonight she was mending shirts for the ranch hands who worked at the Fletcher spread, the largest cattle operation in the territory. They paid her 10 cents a shirt, and she had 6 more to finish before morning. Her back ached from hunching over in the dim light, and she had skipped supper again to save money, her stomach growling in protest. She did not hear the boots on the stairs until they stopped right outside her door. Esther froze, her heart suddenly hammering in her chest. It was past 10 in the evening, and no one had any business being up here at this hour. The knock, when it came, was soft and almost hesitant. "Miss Vaughn, I saw your light still burning." The voice was unfamiliar, deep and rough-edged but not unkind. Esther set down her mending and moved to the door, opening it just a crack with the chain still fastened. A man stood in the hallway, hat in his hands, his face shadowed in the dim light from her single candle. She could make out dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed almost apologetic. "I did not mean to startle you," he said quickly. "My name is James Fletcher. These are my men's shirts you have been working on." Esther felt her cheeks flush. James Fletcher was the ranch owner himself, a man she had never met but had heard plenty about. He was 27, they said, and had built his operation from nothing after coming west from Missouri. Some called him hard but fair, others said he was too demanding, but everyone agreed he paid his debts and expected the same from others. "They will be ready by morning, Mr. Fletcher," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I gave my word. That is not why I am here." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "I was downstairs settling my account with Mrs. Henderson when I happened to glance up and see your window. You have been working by that same candle every night this week, have you not? I have noticed the light when I ride past." Esther did not know what to say to that. The idea that James Fletcher had been paying attention to her window made something flutter in her chest that she firmly pushed down. Men like him did not notice women like her, not in any way that mattered. "I have work to finish," she said simply. "At the cost of your eyesight." He frowned. "Miss Vaughn, I do not mean to presume, but I could not help noticing the dress you were wearing when you brought the shirts back last time. It had been mended so many times I could barely tell what the original fabric was." Shame burned hot in Esther's throat. She knew her clothes were shabby, knew she looked like exactly what she was, a woman barely scraping by. She started to close the door, but James Fletcher's next words stopped her. "I have something in my saddlebag. Would you permit me to fetch it?" Against her better judgment, Esther nodded. He disappeared down the stairs and returned a moment later carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. He held it out to her through the narrow opening of the door. "My men told me you are the finest seamstress they have ever known," he said. "They say you can make worn-out rags look almost new again. I thought perhaps you might use these for yourself." Esther, unwrapped the paper with trembling fingers. Inside were 3 lengths of fabric, more beautiful than anything she had touched in years. There was a deep green calico, a warm brown cotton, and a soft cream muslin that felt like silk against her work-roughened hands. She looked up at James Fletcher, her throat tight with emotion she could not name. "I cannot accept this," she whispered. "It is too much." "Make yourself something," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. In the better light now coming from her room, she could see his face properly. He had strong, honest features, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. His clothes were clean but worn, the clothes of a working man, not someone who put on airs. "Please, consider it payment for the exceptional work you have done. My men's shirts have never looked better." Before she could argue further, he settled his hat back on his head and turned toward the stairs. "Good night, Miss Vaughn. Do not work too late." She stood in her doorway for a long time after he left, holding the fabric against her chest and wondering what had just happened. Men did not do things like this, not without expecting something in return. But James Fletcher had not asked for anything, had not even waited for her thanks. He had simply given her the fabric and left. Esther finished mending the shirts that night, but her eyes kept drifting to the fabric folded carefully on her bed. She had not owned anything new in more than 3 years, not since before her parents died and left her with nothing but debts and the determination to make her own way west. The idea of wearing something she had made herself from beautiful, unmarred cloth seemed almost impossible. The next morning, she delivered the mended shirts to the Fletcher ranch, making the long walk out of town in the growing heat. The ranch was impressive, with a large main house, a bunkhouse, a barn, and several corrals full of horses and cattle. Cowboys moved about their work, calling to each other and raising clouds of dust. Esther made her way to the main house and knocked on the door. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flour on her apron answered. "You must be Miss Vaughn. I am Nancy Reed, the housekeeper. Come in, come in. Mr. Fletcher left your payment on the hall table." The inside of the house was simpler than Esther had expected, furnished with sturdy, practical pieces rather than the ornate furniture she had seen in the homes of wealthy men back east. Everything was clean and well kept, but there was something almost Spartan about it, as if the man who lived here did not care much for luxury. "Mr. Fletcher works hard," Nancy said, following Esther's gaze. "Up before dawn and usually not back until after dark. He built all this from nothing, you know. Came here with barely enough money for a horse and saddle, worked as a hired hand for 2 years until he could buy his first 100 acres. Now he has 3,000 and one of the finest herds in Idaho." Esther took the coins from the table, counting them carefully. Then she counted them again. There was 50 cents too much. "There has been a mistake," she said, holding out the extra coins. Nancy shook her head. "No mistake. Mr. Fletcher said you deserved a bonus for the quality of your work." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think he feels bad about how little you must be making. He is a good man, Miss Vaughn. Gruff sometimes, and he works himself too hard, but his heart is in the right place." Esther left the ranch with more questions than answers. Why would James Fletcher care about how much money she made? Why had he given her that fabric? She barely knew him, had only spoken to him once in the dim hallway of the boarding house. Yet he had noticed her struggling, had paid attention to her worn clothes and the late hours she kept, and he had done something about it. Over the next 2 weeks, Esther spent every spare moment working on a dress for herself. She chose the green calico, saving the other fabrics for later, and poured all of her skill into creating something beautiful. The dress took shape beneath her fingers, fitted and flattering, with careful tucks and a modest neckline. She had not made anything for herself in so long that she had almost forgotten the pleasure of it, the satisfaction of seeing something new and lovely emerge from her efforts. When she finally wore the dress to church on Sunday, she felt transformed. The green brought out the color in her hazel eyes, and the fit showed off the figure she usually hid beneath shapeless, threadbare clothes. She saw heads turn as she walked in, heard the whispers, but she kept her chin high and her eyes forward. James Fletcher was sitting in the back row, and when he saw her, something shifted in his expression. He stood as she passed, nodding respectfully, and Esther felt heat rise in her cheeks. After the service, he approached her on the church steps. "Miss Vaughn, that is a beautiful dress." "Did you make it yourself?" "I did, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you for the fabric. It was very generous of you." He looked almost embarrassed. "You have a real talent. Have you ever considered opening your own shop?" Esther laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That takes money I do not have, Mr. Fletcher. I can barely afford my room as it is." "What if someone were willing to invest in you?" he asked. "A business loan with fair terms." She looked at him sharply. "Why would you do that? You do not know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you work until midnight every night to earn a few dollars. I know you have skill that is going to waste because you have no capital to start with. I know what it is like to be alone in a new place with nothing but determination to keep you going. When I first came here, a man named Tom Bradley gave me a chance. He loaned me the money for my first cattle, and he did not ask for anything but that I pay him back with interest when I could. I paid off that debt 5 years ago, but I have never forgotten what it meant to have someone believe in me." Esther's heart was pounding. "Mr. Fletcher, I could not possibly ask you for such a thing." "You are not asking. I am offering." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "I took the liberty of speaking to Harold Preston at the bank. There is a small storefront available on Main Street, right next to the millinery shop. The rent is reasonable, and with enough for supplies and some initial inventory, you could open a proper dressmaking business. I am willing to loan you $200 at 5% interest to be paid back over 3 years. $200. It was a fortune, more money than Esther had seen in her entire life. Her mind raced with possibilities. A real shop with a proper workspace and light that did not come from a guttering candle. She could advertise, take on bigger projects, maybe even hire an assistant eventually. But the thought of being indebted to James Fletcher for such a sum made her hesitate. "Why?" she asked again. "Why me?" He met her eyes, and for a moment, she saw something raw and honest in his gaze. "Because I pass your window every night and see you working until your candle burns out, and it bothers me more than it should. Because you deserve better than to ruin your eyes and your hands for pennies. Because something in me says you are worth the investment, Miss Vaughn, and I have learned to trust my instincts." Esther took the paper with shaking hands. The terms were written out clearly, fair and reasonable, with no hidden conditions. She read it 3 times, looking for the catch, but there was none. It was exactly what he said it was, a business loan to give her a chance. "I accept," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I will pay back every cent with interest, Mr. Fletcher. You have my word." "I know you will," he said, and he smiled for the first time since she had met him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Call me James, please. If we are going into business together, we should be on a first-name basis." "Esther," she said, and when he took her hand to shake on their agreement, she felt something electric pass between them. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Esther signed the lease on the storefront, using James's loan to pay the first 3 months' rent and to purchase supplies. She bought bolts of fabric in various colors and patterns, needles and thread, buttons and lace, everything she would need to start taking orders. James helped her move a work table and shelving into the space, refusing to let her pay the men he brought from the ranch to do the heavy lifting. "Consider it an investment in my investment," he said with that rare smile that made her stomach flip. She painted a sign herself, working late into the evening to get the lettering just right. Vaughn Dressmaking and Alterations in neat black letters on a white background. When she hung it over the door, she felt a surge of pride so strong it brought tears to her eyes. This was hers. She had built this through her own skill and determination, and with the help of a man who had believed in her when she had barely believed in herself. James came by often during those first weeks, always with some excuse. He needed a shirt mended, or he wanted to check that the storefront was secure, or he was just passing by and thought he would see how she was settling in. Esther came to look forward to his visits, to the way his eyes lit up when he saw a new dress displayed in her window, to the quiet conversations they shared over coffee that she learned to keep brewing in the back room. She learned that he had lost his parents young, just as she had, and that he had come west to escape the memories of a farm that no longer felt like home. She learned that he loved the land with a fierce passion, that he could spend hours talking about cattle breeds and grazing patterns and water rights. She learned that he was lonely, despite his success, and that the big house he had built felt empty most of the time. And James learned about her. He learned that she had taught herself to sew by watching her mother, that she could visualize a finished garment just by looking at someone, that she had dreams of creating truly beautiful things, not just functional clothing. He learned that she was fiercely independent and hated accepting help, even when she desperately needed it. He learned that beneath her quiet exterior was a core of steel that refused to bend no matter how hard life pushed. 3 months after opening her shop, Esther got her first major commission. Margaret Porter, the wife of the territorial judge, came in requesting a complete wardrobe for the upcoming winter social season. It was the kind of order that could make Esther's reputation, and she threw herself into the work with single-minded determination. James found her one evening, long after the shops on Main Street had closed, still working by lamplight. He knocked on the glass door, and she looked up with red-rimmed eyes and thread caught in her hair. "You are going to make yourself sick," he said as she let him in. "When was the last time you ate?" Esther could not remember. Breakfast, maybe. She had been so focused on getting the embroidery right on one of Mrs. Porter's evening gowns that the day had simply disappeared. James disappeared and returned 20 minutes later with 2 plates from the restaurant down the street. He cleared a space on her work table and set them down, the smell of roast beef and potatoes making Esther's stomach growl audibly. "Eat," he commanded, and she was too hungry to argue. They ate in comfortable silence, and then James did something unexpected. He picked up one of the simpler pieces she was working on, a day dress that needed the hem finished, and asked her to show him how to do a basic stitch. "You are not serious," Esther said, laughing for the first time in days. "I am completely serious. You need help and I have 2 functional hands. Show me what to do." So she did, guiding his large, calloused fingers through the movements, trying not to notice how close they were sitting or how good he smelled like leather and sage and something uniquely him. James was surprisingly deft once he got the hang of it, his stitches neat and even. "I think I missed my calling," he joked as he finished the hem. "Maybe I should have been a tailor instead of a rancher." "Somehow I cannot picture you spending your days indoors, bent over fabric," Esther said, smiling at the image. "No, I suppose not. I need the sky above me and the wind in my face. But I can see why you love this. There is something satisfying about creating something with your own hands, watching it take shape." "That is exactly it," Esther said softly. "Every stitch is a choice, a small piece of something larger. And when it is finished, when someone puts on a dress I have made and I see how it makes them feel, how it changes the way they carry themselves, that is worth all the long hours and tired eyes. James looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. You are remarkable, Esther Vaughn. Do you know that? The air between them felt suddenly charged, heavy with something unspoken. Esther's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But then James stood abruptly, gathering the empty plates. I should let you get back to work. But please, promise me you will not stay up all night again. You are no good to your clients if you collapse from exhaustion. I promise, Esther said, though they both knew it was a promise she would probably break. After he left, she sat for a long time, staring at the hem he had sewn. His stitches were visible among hers, slightly larger and less practiced but earnest in their execution. Something about that hem, about the fact that James Fletcher had sat with her and learned something new just to help her, made her chest ache with an emotion she was afraid to name. The weeks leading up to the winter social season were the busiest of Esther's life. Word of her work had spread, and she was taking orders from women all over Boise and even from neighboring towns. She hired 2 assistants, young women who needed the work and had some basic sewing skills she could refine. The shop thrived, and Esther found herself able to not only pay her rent, but to start saving money and making regular payments on her loan to James. She saw him less during this time, as he was busy preparing his ranch for winter and moving his cattle to lower pastures. But he still found time to stop by, usually late in the evening when the rush had died down. They fell into an easy rhythm, these quiet moments together, talking about their days or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence while Esther worked and James read the newspaper. It was during one of these evenings that James finally spoke the words that had been hovering between them for months. Esther, I need to tell you something, and I am not entirely sure how to say it. She looked up from the beading she was attaching to a bodice, her heart suddenly racing. What is it? When I first saw you that night, working by candlelight in that tiny room, something shifted in me. I told myself I was just being a good neighbor, that helping you set up your business was simply the right thing to do. But that was not the whole truth. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. The truth is, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. You are in my head when I wake up in the morning and when I go to sleep at night. I find excuses to come into town just so I can see you. And I know this probably is not what you want to hear, given that I am your creditor and you might feel obligated to be kind to me, but I am falling in love with you, Esther. I think I have been since that first night. Esther set down her work with trembling hands. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what he had just said. James Fletcher, who could have any woman in the territory, was telling her he loved her. It seemed impossible, like something from one of the penny romances she sometimes read when she could not sleep. James, I do not feel obligated, she said carefully. And if I have been kind to you, it is not because of the loan. It is because you have become the best part of my days. I look forward to your visits more than I should. I have started keeping coffee brewing even on days when I do not drink it myself, just in case you stop by. And when you are not here, everything feels a little less bright. Hope blazed in his eyes. Does that mean what I think it means? It means I love you too, Esther said, and saying the words out loud felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at once. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was foolish and that I should focus on building my business. But my heart does not seem to listen to reason where you are concerned. James crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, cupping her face in his hands. May I kiss you? Yes, she breathed. and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then deeper, filled with months of longing and restraint finally breaking free. Esther melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt completely safe and completely wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly. I want to take you to dinner and to dances, and to show the whole town that you are mine, if you will have me. And eventually, when enough time has passed that no one can say we rushed into things, I want to marry you, Esther Vaughn. I want to come home every night to you. I want to build a life together, a real partnership where we support each other's dreams." "I want that too," Esther said, tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from overwhelming joy. "I want all of that with you." True to his word, James courted her with old-fashioned propriety. He took her to dinner at the best restaurant in Boise, enduring the stares and whispers of people who could not quite believe that the wealthy rancher was seriously pursuing the seamstress. He escorted her to the winter social, where she wore one of her own creations, a deep blue silk that made her look like royalty. He brought her flowers and books, and once, memorably, a ridiculous hat he had seen in a shop window and thought she might find amusing. Esther's business continued to flourish. The gowns she had made for Mrs. Porter were such a success that she received orders from as far away as Lewiston and even Spokane. She was able to pay off her loan to James a full year early, handing him the final payment with a sense of pride and accomplishment that nothing could diminish. "I always knew you would do it," James said, tucking the money into his pocket without counting it. "You are the most determined person I have ever met." "I learned from the best," Esther replied, squeezing his hand. They were married on a bright spring day in 1884, 2 years after that night when James had first knocked on her door with a bundle of fabric. Esther wore a dress of cream muslin, the fabric he had given her that night, transformed into a wedding gown of breathtaking simplicity and elegance. Nancy Reed cried through the entire ceremony, and even some of the hardened cowboys from the Fletcher ranch were seen wiping their eyes. James had added a wing to the ranch house for Esther's workroom, a bright space with large windows and plenty of room for her supplies and equipment. She continued to run her shop in town 3 days a week, but now she could also work from home, and the women who came to the ranch for fittings often commented on how happy and welcoming the house felt with her presence in it. The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and discovery. They learned each other's rhythms, the small habits and preferences that made up a shared life. Esther learned that James was grumpy before his morning coffee, and that he had nightmares sometimes about the years when he had barely had enough to eat. James learned that Esther liked to work late into the night when inspiration struck, and that she had a wicked sense of humor that came out when she was comfortable. But mostly, they learned that they were better together than apart. James's careful planning and business sense complemented Esther's creativity and skill. They consulted each other on major decisions, and their respect for each other's work and dreams only grew deeper with time. In the spring of 1885, Esther discovered she was pregnant. She told James one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, his arm around her shoulders and her head on his chest. "I am going to need to adjust my pattern soon," she said casually. "I find I am getting a bit thick around the middle." It took James a moment to understand what she was saying, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing until they were dizzy. "A baby," he said wonderingly, his hand splayed across her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Esther asked, though she could already see the answer in his face. Happy does not begin to cover it, Esther, you have given me everything I never knew I needed. A home that actually feels like a home, a partner who challenges and supports me, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive." Their son was born in January of 1886, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes. They named him Thomas Bradley Fletcher, after the man who had given James his first chance, and from the moment he entered the world with a lusty cry, he had both of his parents wrapped around his tiny fingers. Esther cut back her work hours after Thomas was born, but she never stopped designing and creating. She made children's clothes now too, beautiful little outfits that were both practical and charming. The shop in town thrived under the management of her assistants, and she went in once a week to check on things and take new orders. James was a devoted father, coming in from the ranch each day to spend time with his son, teaching him to walk and talk and eventually, as he grew, to ride. Watching her husband with their child, seeing the gentleness and patience he showed, made Esther fall in love with him all over again. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Catherine, named for both of their mothers. She was a sweet baby with copper-colored hair that neither parent could quite account for, though James's mother had apparently had red hair, according to Nancy Reed, who remembered such things. The house that had once felt empty to James was now filled with the sounds of children playing, with laughter and occasional tears, with all the messy, beautiful chaos of family life. Esther and James sat together on the porch one evening after the children were in bed, holding hands and watching the stars come out. "You remember that night when I knocked on your door?" James asked. "When you opened it just a crack and looked at me like I might be dangerous." "I remember thinking you were crazy, bringing fabric to a strange woman in the middle of the night," Esther said, smiling at the memory. "I almost turned back 3 times on those stairs. I kept telling myself it was none of my business, that you probably did not want some stranger interfering in your life, but something made me keep going." "I am glad you did," Esther said softly. "That moment changed everything for me. Not just because of the fabric or the loan, though those things mattered. It was because someone saw me, really saw me, and decided I was worth an investment. You gave me more than money or materials, James. You gave me faith in myself." "You did the same for me," James replied. "I was so focused on building the ranch, on proving myself, that I had forgotten what I was working for. You reminded me that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. You made me whole, Esther." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the grass. Esther thought about the girl she had been, mending shirts by candlelight in a cramped room, never imagining that her life could become this rich and full. She thought about all the moments that had led them here, the choices and chances and small acts of courage that had woven together into something beautiful. "I love you," she said, squeezing James's hand. "I love the life we have built together." "I love you too," he replied. "And I promise you, I will spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret taking a chance on a cowboy with more hope than sense." "You had more than hope," Esther said. "You had vision and kindness and the courage to believe in someone when they needed it most. Those are the qualities that built everything we have." As the years passed, their family continued to grow. A third child, a son they named Jacob William, came along in 1889, completing their family. The ranch prospered under James's careful management, and Esther's business became one of the most respected in Idaho. Women came from all over the territory for her designs, and she trained several young seamstresses who went on to open their own shops, spreading her influence even further. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved books and numbers, showing more interest in the business side of the ranch than the day-to-day cattle work. Sarah was a firecracker, fearless and adventurous, always covered in dirt and climbing things she should not climb. And Jacob was the peacemaker, sweet-natured and empathetic, with a gift for understanding what people needed before they said it. James and Esther watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet nostalgia for the baby days that passed so quickly. But they also looked forward to the future, to seeing what kind of adults their children would become and what paths they would choose. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, James took Esther back to the boarding house where they had first met. Mrs. Henderson had passed away 2 years earlier, and the building was now run by her nephew, but the room where Esther had once worked by candlelight was still available. James had arranged to rent it for the night, and when Esther stepped inside, she found it transformed. The narrow bed and single chair were still there, but James had filled the room with candles, dozens of them, their soft light flickering just as her single tallow candle had flickered all those years ago. On the bed was a length of fabric, beautiful forest green silk, and next to it was a note in James's bold handwriting. For the woman who makes magic with thread and needle, make yourself something beautiful, though you are already the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. All my love, James. Esther turned to her husband, tears streaming down her face. You remembered. I remember everything about that night, James said, pulling her into his arms. I remember how you looked, so determined and proud despite your worn clothes and tired eyes. I remember thinking that here was a woman worth knowing, worth fighting for, and I have never regretted following that instinct. They renewed their wedding vows there in that tiny room, with only each other as witnesses, speaking the promises they had made a decade earlier, and adding new ones forged through years of partnership and love. And when they finally blew out the candles and left the room, hand in hand, Esther carried the green silk with her, already envisioning the dress she would create from it. Life continued its steady rhythm through the years. The children grew and began to forge their own paths. Thomas went to university in the East to study business, returning with a sharp mind for finance and a determination to modernize the ranch's operations. Sarah shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, though she ran her classroom with the same fearless energy she had brought to tree climbing as a child. And Jacob, true to his nature, studied medicine, driven by a desire to help people and heal their hurts. James's hair went gray at the temples, and his face gained more lines, but to Esther, he only became more handsome with age. She too showed the passage of time, her hands more gnarled from years of sewing, her eyes requiring spectacles for close work. But her skill never diminished, and her joy in creating beautiful things never faded. They celebrated the new century together in 1900, surrounded by their children and the first of their grandchildren. Thomas had married a smart, practical woman named Helen, who managed the ranch's accounts with brilliant efficiency. Sarah had found a fellow teacher, a gentle man named Robert who appreciated her fire and matched it with his own quiet strength. Jacob was courting a nurse he had met during his medical training, a kind woman named Emma, who seemed to complete him in the same way Esther completed James. On quiet evenings when the house was still and the work was done, James and Esther would often sit in her workroom, she sewing by the light of proper lamps now, he reading or working on ledgers. Sometimes they talked, sharing thoughts and memories. Sometimes they simply enjoyed each other's presence, the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other so well that words were not always necessary. You ever wonder what would have happened if I had not stopped that night? James asked once. If I had just ridden past your window and gone home. I try not to think about it, Esther admitted. I like to believe we would have found each other eventually. There is something about us that feels inevitable, like we were always meant to be together. I believe that too, James said. But I am still grateful I did not wait for fate to work things out. Some blessings you have to reach for yourself. As they entered their later years, James and Esther began to step back from the day-to-day operations of their businesses. Thomas took over management of the ranch, implementing new techniques and technologies that increased both productivity and profits. Esther's shop was now run entirely by her former assistants, though she still consulted on special projects and trained new seamstresses who showed particular promise. They traveled some, taking the train to San Francisco and even once, all the way to New York City. But they always came home to Boise, to the ranch and the mountains and the life they had built together. This was where they belonged, where their roots ran deep. In the spring of 1910, on a day when the wildflowers were blooming and the air smelled of new grass and possibility, James and Esther sat on their porch watching the sun set. They were in their 50s now, grandparents several times over, and still as in love as they had been on their wedding day. I have been thinking, James said, his arm around Esther's shoulders in the familiar gesture that still made her heart flutter, about legacy and what we leave behind. That is a serious topic for such a beautiful evening, Esther teased, but she nestled closer to him, ready to listen. I know we have the ranch and your business, and those are important. But the legacy I am most proud of is less tangible than that. It is the way we have lived our lives, the example we have set for our children and grandchildren. We have shown them that success comes from hard work and integrity, yes, but also from kindness and taking chances on people, from believing that everyone deserves an opportunity to show what they can do. You are thinking about the loan you gave me, Esther said. Not just that. I am thinking about all the people you have trained over the years, the young women you have given opportunities to. I am thinking about the scholarships Thomas has set up for ranch hands' children to attend school. I am thinking about the free clinic Jacob is planning to open in Boise. Our children learned from watching us, Esther. They learned that those who have been given much should give back in turn. That started with you, Esther reminded him, with a cowboy who saw a woman mending clothes by candlelight and decided to do something about it. You could have ridden past, James. You could have told yourself it was not your concern. But you stopped, and that single act of compassion changed not just my life but the lives of everyone we have touched since then. We changed each other, James said. You taught me that building something meaningful is about more than just accumulating wealth or land. It is about creating beauty and opportunity and hope. Every dress you have ever made has been more than just clothing. It has been a statement that people deserve to feel valued and special, no matter their circumstances. They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands and counting their blessings. 3 healthy children, all happily settled in their own lives. 7 grandchildren so far, with more likely on the way. A ranch that continued to thrive, and a business that had put Boise on the map for high-quality dressmaking. But more than any of that, they had each other, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had only deepened with time. You have any regrets? Esther asked, a question she had wondered about but never quite had the courage to voice until now. Not a single one, James replied without hesitation. Not one day, not one choice. My only wish is that we had more time, but I suppose that is the wish of everyone who has been truly happy. You never want it to end. Then we will have to make the most of every day we have left, Esther said firmly. I am not ready to slow down just yet. I still have designs in my head that need to become real. and I believe you still have plans for the ranch that Thomas has not even thought of." James laughed, the sound rich and warm. "You know me too well. Yes, I have ideas. I always have ideas. That is the blessing and the curse of a mind that cannot rest." "Good," Esther said. "Because I married a man of vision and determination, and I would be disappointed if you suddenly became complacent." They continued on this way for many more years, active and engaged with life, refusing to let age slow them down more than necessary. They saw their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. They watched as the ranch and the dressmaking business adapted to the changing times, incorporating new methods while holding on to the core values that had made them successful. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1924, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Nearly 50 people filled the house and spilled out onto the lawn. 3 generations joined together by the love of 2 people who had taken a chance on each other 4 decades earlier. Thomas gave a toast that had everyone wiping their eyes. "My parents taught me that true wealth is not measured in dollars or acres, but in relationships and the positive impact you have on the world around you." They have lived their values every single day, through their work, their generosity, and most of all, through the love they have shown each other and all of us. I am the man I am today because of their example, and I hope I can pass even a fraction of that wisdom on to my own children. Sarah added her own words, speaking of her mother's strength and independence, of how Esther had shown her that women could build empires of their own while still maintaining loving partnerships. Jacob spoke of his father's integrity and compassion, of the countless times James had helped people quietly, without seeking recognition or reward. But it was little Emma, Thomas's youngest daughter at age 8, who perhaps said it best. She stood up on her chair, her voice ringing out clear and true. "Grandma and Grandpa are magic. They make everyone around them better and happier. When I grow up, I want to love someone the way they love each other." James and Esther looked at each other, their eyes shining with unshed tears and overwhelming gratitude. This was their legacy, not just the businesses and property, but this family, these relationships, this understanding that love was not just a feeling but a choice renewed every single day. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, James and Esther found themselves alone on the porch once more, the place where they had shared so many quiet conversations over the decades. 40 years, Esther mused. Somehow it feels both like a lifetime and like no time at all. "I know what you mean," James agreed. "I can close my eyes and still see you as you were that first night, so fierce and proud, opening your door just a crack. And I can open them and see the woman you are now, even more beautiful because of all the years and experiences written on your face." "We have had a good life, James Fletcher, better than I ever dreamed possible." "The best life," James agreed. "And it all started with a bundle of fabric and 7 words. 'Make yourself something,'" Esther quoted softly. "You gave me so much more than fabric that night. You gave me a future." "We gave each other a future," James corrected. "You brought color and warmth into my life, Esther. You made my house a home and my success meaningful. Everything good in my life can be traced back to you." They sat together as the moon rose, 2 people who had built something extraordinary from humble beginnings. They had faced challenges over the years, weathered difficult times and celebrated triumphs, but through it all, they had remained partners in the truest sense of the word. As they grew older still, into their late 60s and early 70s, they slowed down naturally, their bodies no longer as strong as they once had been. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other never diminished. They took shorter walks now, around the ranch rather than out into the hills, but they still walked hand in hand, pointing out things of interest and sharing quiet observations. Esther's hands eventually became too stiff with arthritis to do the fine, detailed work she had once excelled at. But she continued to design, sketching patterns that her former assistants and granddaughters would bring to life. James's knees gave him trouble, making it difficult to ride for long hours, but he still consulted on ranch decisions and delighted in teaching his great-grandchildren about cattle and horses and the land he loved. On a crisp autumn day in 1928, James and Esther celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The celebration was smaller this time, limited to immediate family due to their advanced age, but it was no less meaningful. They renewed their vows once again, standing in the parlor where they had spent so many evenings together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around them. 50 years ago, I married my best friend, James said, his voice thinner now but still strong with emotion. And every year since has only confirmed what I knew that day, that Esther Vaughn, now Esther Fletcher, is the finest person I have ever known. She has made my life richer in every possible way, and I thank God for every day I have been granted with her. James Fletcher saw me when I was invisible, Esther said, her own voice wavering with age but clear in its conviction. He believed in me when I barely believed in myself. He gave me not just material support but emotional support, not just love but respect and partnership. He has been my rock and my adventure, my comfort and my challenge. I could not have asked for a better companion for this journey through life. That night, as they lay in bed together, Esther rested her head on James's shoulder in the way she had done for 5 decades. His arm came around her automatically and they both sighed contentedly. "James," Esther said softly. "Yes, my love, thank you for everything, for seeing me that night, for taking a chance, for building this life with me, for every moment of the past 50 years. "Thank you for saying yes," James replied, "for accepting my help and then later my heart, for making me a better man, for giving me a family and a purpose beyond just surviving and succeeding. You are and always will be the best decision I ever made." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found their perfect match against all odds. James passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1931, at the age of 76. Esther was bereft, but not broken. She had known this day would come eventually, had dreaded it while trying not to think about it. But she also knew that she had been blessed beyond measure, that their 50 years together had been fuller and richer than many people experienced in twice that time. She continued on for 2 more years, finding solace in her family and her work. She finished one last design, a wedding dress for her youngest granddaughter, pouring all of her skill and love into the creation. When Sarah wore that dress down the aisle, every person in the church commented that they had never seen anything more beautiful. Esther passed away in her sleep in the winter of 1933, surrounded by her children and grandchildren who had gathered when it became clear she was fading. Her last words were about James, about seeing him again, about the life they had built together. At her funeral, Thomas placed a piece of green calico on her casket, the same fabric James had given her so many years ago, the fabric that had started everything. Next to it, he placed one of James's work shirts, mended so many times that it was more patches than original fabric, but kept because it represented those early days when love had first begun to bloom. The Fletcher family continued to thrive, generation after generation, always remembering the story of how it all began. The tale of a cowboy who saw a woman mending clothes by candlelight and decided to do something about it. The story of a seamstress who had the courage to accept help and then build something extraordinary. The story of two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other every day for 50 years. The ranch still operated well into the 21st century, and descendants of Esther's dressmaking business could be found all across Idaho. But more than that, the legacy of kindness and opportunity that James and Esther had established continued to ripple outward, touching countless lives in ways both large and small. Because in the end, their story was about more than romance, though the love between them had been deep and true. It was about the power of compassion, about seeing someone's potential and giving them a chance to realize it. It was about partnership and respect, about building something together that was greater than either could have achieved alone. It was about choosing love not just once, in a dramatic moment, but over and over again in the small, quiet choices of everyday life. And it all started with a knock on a door, a bundle of fabric, and 7 simple words that would change 2 lives forever. Make yourself something.